Hello, my name is Marcella. I never thought I would be standing here, telling strangers about the night my entire life shattered in front of flashing cameras and fake smiles. But maybe if I let it out, maybe if I share it all, the ache inside my chest will finally loosen. It was my sister's wedding, the kind of event that looked picture perfect on the outside but hid something rotten at its core. Golden chandeliers glowed over tables lined with crystal glasses, the band played soft jazz, and the air was thick with the scent of roses. My sister Lila glided across the room in her designer gown like she was born for the spotlight. Everyone adored her, whispered about her beauty, her grace, her fairy tale life. And me? I stood there in the corner, smiling politely, clapping when expected, while my insides churned. I had no idea the humiliation waiting for me was far greater than anything I had ever imagined. My parents called me forward, not in private, not gently. They wanted a stage and they made me the spectacle. My father's voice, cold and commanding, carried across the room. Marcella, hand over your penthouse keys. The words hit me like ice water. My penthouse, the one thing in this world I built with my own hands. My sleepless nights, my sacrifices, it wasn't theirs to give away. But as I looked around, I realized everyone already knew. This had been arranged. I forced a small laugh. This has to be a joke. But my mother's smirk told me it wasn't. Her voice cut like a blade. You don't need it anymore. Your sister and her husband will live there. You'll move back with us. Now give the keys. My sister's groom smirked too, like he was already picturing himself in my home. My hand tightened around my clutch, nails biting into my palm. When I whispered no, my mother's face twisted with rage, and then her hand cracked across my cheek hard enough to rip my earring clean. From my ear, the room, my skin burned, but worse than the pain was the humiliation. 50 people watching me being struck down by the woman who was supposed to protect me. I stood taller even as my cheek throbbed. My voice was calm, but the storm in me was raging. You will regret this. I turned and walked out, heels echoing against the marble floor like war drums. Outside, in the cold night, I pulled out my phone. My hands trembled, but I pressed the number I hadn't dared dial in years. When the voice answered, I said only 3 words, "It's time now." 1 hour later, the reception doors burst open, and when my mother saw who walked in, her scream split the music like glass shattering. The room froze when he walked in. His tall frame carried an aura of danger, the kind that silences a crowd before a single word is spoken. His dark suit clung to his broad shoulders, his eyes sharp and unyielding as they scanned the hall. Some guests whispered in confusion, others clutched their glasses tighter, but my mother, her face went white. I had never seen her tremble before, not once in my life. But when she saw him, she stumbled back a step, her champagne flute slipping from her hand and shattering against the marble. For the first time, the woman who once seemed untouchable, who controlled every room she entered, looked powerless. That man was Victor. Years ago, he had been my mother's worst mistake, a man she crossed when she thought she was untouchable. I had met him once as a teenager, in a moment I was never supposed to witness. I remembered his voice, the way he looked at her with the kind of promise that made my stomach knot. My mother always told me never to mention his name again, but I never forgot. She ruined him once and he had been waiting. Now I had summoned him, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. My father tried to play it off, clapping his hands nervously, telling the band to keep playing, but the music died on its own, every musician too shaken to lift their instruments. Victor's voice cut through the silence. "Marcella," he said, his deep tone echoing off the walls. "It's been a long time." His eyes didn't leave me. For a moment, the chaos of the room faded, and all I felt was a strange, icy calm. I nodded once, and that was all he needed. My mother tried to cover her panic with anger. "You don't belong here," she snapped, though her voice cracked in a way no one had ever heard before. But Victor only smirked, that dangerous smile pulling at his lips. "Oh, I belong exactly where I am, and it's about time everyone sees what kind of woman you really are." He turned his gaze to the crowd. "Do they know? Do they know what you did? Gasp rippled through the guests. My sister clutched her new husband's arm, her perfect night crumbling before her eyes. My father grabbed my mother's wrist, whispering frantically, but she yanked away, her mask of control slipping. I stood by the door, my heart racing, but I didn't move. This was the moment I had waited for. The humiliation she dealt me tonight was only the final straw. Her cruelty had been my whole life, and now, finally, the truth she buried for years was about to be unearthed. Victor reached into his coat and pulled out a small black folder. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind where every breath felt too loud. My mother lunged forward, shouting stop, but he raised his hand, keeping her at bay with nothing but a glare. Then, with deliberate slowness, he opened the folder. The papers inside glared back under the golden lights, ready to set fire to everything she thought she had built. My breath caught as Victor laid the papers on the nearest table. Guests leaned forward, their curiosity pulling them closer like moths to a flame. My mother's hands shook, and that alone was enough to make whispers rise across the hall. She had never shown weakness, never allowed even a crack in her polished mask, but tonight it was crumbling. Victor's voice was steady, deliberate, and cold. These are financial records, contracts, and testimonies, all tracing back to your beloved matriarch. He didn't need to raise his tone. The weight of his words carried through the hall effortlessly. She built her fortune on fraud, betrayal, and lies. She destroyed families. He stole lives. My father lunged toward the folder, but Victor's men, I hadn't even realized they had slipped in quietly, dressed sharp but with eyes that missed nothing, blocked his path. The crowd erupted into murmurs, people exchanging horrified looks. My sister's groom whispered something into her ear, but her face had gone pale, and for once she didn't look like the glowing bride she thought she was. My mother turned toward me, her eyes wild. Marcella, you don't know what you've done. Her voice wavered between anger and desperation, a sound I had never heard from her lips. Part of me wanted to flinch, to believe her, but the sting of her slap still burned on my cheek. The memory of every insult, every humiliation, every time she made me feel small and unwanted, it all hardened inside me. I know exactly what I've done, I whispered, my words sharp as glass. And in that moment, I didn't care if anyone else heard me. Victor tapped the folder with one finger. Shall I read aloud? He asked, his smile cruel but controlled. The guests went silent, leaning into the tension like they were afraid to miss a single word. My mother screamed, "Don't you dare," but her voice cracked and it sounded less like authority and more like fear. He opened the first page and began to read. Names, numbers, dates, each line heavier than the last, painting a picture of a woman who would betray anyone for power. The gasps grew louder, some guests covering their mouths, others staring at my mother with wide, accusing eyes. The walls of her kingdom were collapsing right in front of her, and as I watched, I realized something that chilled me even more. This wasn't just about exposing her. This was revenge. And it wasn't only mine. Victor had been waiting for this moment longer than I had, and now I wasn't sure how far he was willing to go. The room felt smaller with every word Victor read aloud, as if the walls were inching closer, trapping us all inside my mother's lies. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some too polite to leave, others too fascinated to look away. I could see the disbelief on their faces slowly turn into disgust, as if every glass of champagne they had raised tonight suddenly tasted bitter. My sister clung to her husband's arm, her lips trembling as she whispered something I couldn't hear, her perfect facade dissolving under the weight of the truth. My father tried to speak, his voice low, commanding, but it no longer carried the strength it once did. This is nonsense, fabricated, old grudges. He looked around, desperate for support, but no one came to his side. Even his closest friends avoided his gaze, their eyes fixed on the damning pages in Victor's hands. My mother, usually the queen of every room, looked smaller, her face drained of its color, her jaw tight, as she fought to maintain control. Victor leaned back, his voice cutting like a blade. Nonsense? Then why did the banks settle? Why did the partners disappear? Their names erased, their assets swallowed. His eyes flickered toward me for a brief moment, and I saw the fire in them. This wasn't just vengeance, this was a man finally delivering on a promise he had held close for years. My stomach twisted, but I didn't stop him. I couldn't. My mother turned on me suddenly, her voice breaking. "Marcella, don't let him do this. He's using you. You'll regret this." Her words struck me harder than her slap had. For a flicker of a second, I saw not the monster who had humiliated me all my life, but the woman who raised me, the mother whose approval I once begged for. The little girl inside me almost wanted to run into her arms to end this chaos, to pretend none of it was real, but then I remembered the sting on my cheek, the shame in front of 50 guests, and the years of being cast aside for my sister's spotlight. That love she wanted me to feel now was never real. It was a mask, just like everything else about her. I took a step forward, my heels clicking sharply against the marble. My voice didn't rise. I didn't need it to. All my life you've taken from me. Tonight you tried to take the one thing I built with my own hands. But you forgot something. I'm not a child anymore. And I don't need you to survive. Her face broke. For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Not anger, not control, not power, fear. And in that moment, I realized I finally had the upper hand. Victor closed the folder with a snap, the sound echoing through the silent hall. "This is only the beginning," he said, his voice low but certain. The guest stared at my mother as if she were already stripped of everything. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being humiliated. The silence in the room was unbearable, thick enough to choke on. Every eye was fixed on my mother, the woman they had admired for years, now stripped of her golden mask. She tried to stand tall, but her hands trembled at her sides, betraying her. My father looked at her with an expression I had never seen before. Not love, not loyalty, but suspicion, as if he was realizing in front of everyone that the woman he married had kept more secrets than he could count. Victor slid the folder back into his coat and turned to me with a subtle nod. It wasn't warm, it wasn't comforting, but it was acknowledgement. As if he was saying, "This is yours now." My heart raced, my palms sweaty, yet I felt a power in me I had never known. For once, I wasn't the forgotten daughter, the shadow standing behind her perfect sister. Tonight, I was the one with control. My mother suddenly rushed toward me, her eyes wet, her voice frantic. "Marcella, please. Whatever he's promised you, whatever you think you'll gain from this, it will destroy you too. Don't do this." Her desperation rattled me for a split second. There was a rawness in her tone I had never heard before, as if for once she wasn't acting, wasn't performing. But it was too late for me to doubt, too late to turn back. The crowd parted around us, guests whispering furiously, their faces hungry for more drama, like vultures circling a wounded animal. My sister finally broke her silence, her voice sharp. "You couldn't let me have this, could you?" she spat, tears running down her face. "You had to ruin my wedding too? You're pathetic." Her words sliced through me, and for a moment I almost laughed. She still didn't see it. She still thought this was about her. I steadied myself, lifting my "This isn't about your wedding. It never was. This is about the truth, and if your husband is smart, he'll realize tonight that he married into a family built on lies." Her groom stiffened beside her, his smirk long gone, his eyes darting between us as if he was calculating what marrying her really meant. Victor's men remained at the edges of the hall, watchful, their presence alone enough to keep chaos from erupting. My father tried once more to regain control, raising his voice. "Enough of this circus. A lie, you will come with us now. We'll handle this privately." But the strength in his tone had vanished, his authority crumbling. I looked him in the eyes and said the words I had been holding back my entire life. "No, I'm not your pawn anymore. You've controlled me long enough. Tonight, you don't get to decide for me." My voice shook at first, but when I saw the shock in his eyes, my confidence solidified. Victor chuckled softly, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. "The little girl grew teeth," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. My mother's knees buckled slightly, and for the first time, she leaned on my father for support. The woman who once slapped me in front of 50 guests now looked like a fragile shadow of herself, and in that moment I knew This was only the beginning of my revenge. The reception no longer felt like a wedding. The chandelier still sparkled above, the table still overflowed with flowers and wine, but the air had shifted into something sharp, electric, dangerous. Guests who had once come to celebrate were now frozen in their seats, torn between loyalty and fear, their laughter replaced by whispers that cut through the silence like blades. I stood there watching the empire my parents had built begin to crumble in front of me, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible, I felt powerful. My sister's groom finally spoke, his voice lower than usual but laced with irritation. "What exactly am I marrying into here?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room like a man realizing too late that he had walked into a trap. My sister gripped his arm tighter, her tears smudging the perfect makeup she had obsessed over all day. "Don't listen to them," she begged, her voice trembling. "They're just trying to ruin us," but her words sounded hollow, desperate. Even he seemed to hear the cracks in her denial. My mother straightened suddenly, forcing her spine tall again, her voice rising above the murmurs. "Enough. You people don't know what you're listening to. This is nothing but old grudges resurfacing, eh?" She glared at me, her eyes burning. "Marcella, whatever game you think you're playing, you won't win. You're only embarrassing yourself." For a moment, her mask slipped back on, and I almost believed she still had control. But the quiver in her fingers, the unease in her voice, it betrayed her. The guests noticed. Everyone noticed. Victor chuckled under his breath, the sound low and dangerous. "Embarrassing herself," he repeated. "No, Marcella is doing exactly what you feared she would one day do." She stopped kneeling. His words hung heavy in the air, and every head turned toward me. For a split second, I felt exposed, as if the spotlight had been shoved onto me, but instead of shrinking, I lifted my chin. My cheeks still stung from the slap she had given me earlier, but now the fire in my cut. My mother straightened suddenly, forcing her spine tall again, her voice rising above the murmurs. "Enough. You people don't know what you're listening to. This is nothing but old grudges resurfacing, eh?" She glared at me, her eyes burning. "Marcella, whatever game you think you're playing, you won't win. You're only embarrassing yourself." For a moment, her mask slipped back on, and I almost believed she still had control. But the quiver in her fingers, the unease in her voice, it betrayed her. The guests noticed. Everyone noticed. Victor chuckled under his breath, the sound low and dangerous. "Embarrassing herself," he repeated. "No, Marcella is doing exactly what you feared she would one day do." She stopped kneeling. His words hung heavy in the air, and every head turned toward me. For a split second, I felt exposed, as if the spotlight had been shoved onto me, but instead of shrinking, I lifted my chin. My cheeks still stung from the slap she had given me earlier, but now the fire in my cut. I knew this was only the surface of my revenge. My sister's groom pulled his arm free at last, his face pale as though the ground had been pulled from beneath him. He looked at her with something colder than anger, disbelief. "Is any of this true?" he asked, his voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. My sister shook her head violently, reaching for him with shaking hands. "No, they're lying. It's all lies." But her desperation betrayed her. She didn't even glance at the documents. She didn't dare, because she knew what they contained. Her silence, her panic was an answer in itself. The room erupted into gasps, then fell into a hush so heavy it pressed on my chest like stone. Victor slid the folder toward the groom, his gaze sharp and unrelenting. "See for yourself," he said simply, his tone calm in the chaos. The man hesitated, then opened it with trembling hands. Each page he turned drained the color from his face. I could see his heart breaking, not just from my sister's betrayal, but from realizing the life he thought he was stepping into was nothing but a hollow, rotting empire. He finally slammed the papers shut and threw them onto the floor as though they burned his hands. My sister gasped, clutching his sleeve, but he pulled away from her like she was a stranger. My mother's voice rose again, sharp and commanding. "Stop this nonsense. This is not the time or place." She pointed a finger at Victor, her face twisted with rage. "You've always hated us. You'd poison anyone just to watch us fall." Her voice cracked then, just slightly, but enough for people to notice. My father tried to stand behind her to shield her with his silence, but I could see the panic in his eyes, the flicker of fear he couldn't quite bury. That was the moment I realized the truth wasn't just about documents or money, it was about power. For years, they had used it to break me, to erase me, to make me nothing. But tonight, every lie, every secret, every wound they inflicted had led to this turning point. The top of literally 2005, and for once the power wasn't in their hands, it was in mine. I took a step forward, my voice steady, stronger than it had ever been. You wanted this day to humiliate me. You wanted me to sit here and watch you celebrate everything you stole, everything you built from lies. But tonight isn't yours anymore, it's mine. My words cut through the silence like a blade, and I saw her flinch, just barely, but enough to let me know I had struck the heart. The guests sat frozen, caught between awe and fear, and I could feel their eyes on me, weighing me, waiting to see how far I'd go. My sister stood trembling, abandoned by the man she thought she trapped forever, her mascara streaking down her face. My parents tried to hold on to their mask of control, but the cracks were wide now, impossible to hide, and in that suspended moment, I knew this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was the beginning of their undoing. The tension in the hall was unbearable. It felt as if the very air had grown thick, pressing down on every guest, trapping them in silence. My mother clung to her pride like a drowning woman to driftwood, but her voice trembled as she barked at the guests to ignore me, to enjoy the wedding, to pretend nothing was happening, but no one moved. No one even touched their glasses. They were all waiting, hanging on what I might say next, as if they too had been chained by my family's lies all these years and were finally seeing the lock snap open. I glanced at my father. He wasn't yelling like my mother, nor crying like my sister. He was just staring at me, his jaw tight, his knuckles white against the chair he gripped. I recognized that look. It wasn't anger, it was fear, the same fear I'd seen in him when I was 16 and overheard his phone call in the middle of the night, the one he thought no one else HOA had heard, the one about a debt that wasn't just money, about a secret that, if exposed, would destroy him. I felt my chest rise and fall as I drew in the moment, the weight of every eye fixed on me. You think the penthouse is the worst thing I could take from you? I asked, my voice calm but carrying through the hall like a low thunder. You think slapping me in front of strangers, calling me nothing would break me? No, you've already lost the one thing you can never get back, your name. Because I know what you've done. My mother's face froze, her lips parting in shock. My father shifted in his chair, a bead of sweat running down his temple. My sister shook her head, whispering, "No, don't, please don't." But her words only fueled me further. I took a step forward, close enough to see the panic sparking in my mother's eyes. 20 years ago, I said slowly, letting each word hang heavy in the room, you covered up something, a crime. A man who trusted you lost everything because of you. And you didn't just stay quiet, you profited from it. You built your fortune on the ashes of his life, and now you sit here pretending to be noble, to be respectable, while his children live in poverty. Gasps rippled through the hall like waves breaking one after the other. People turned to each other, whispering in disbelief, their eyes darting back to my parents for confirmation. My mother shook her head violently, screaming, "Lies, all lies." But her voice broke on the last word. My father tried to speak, but his throat caught. He didn't deny it, he couldn't. And in that silence, that failure to protest, I saw their empire begin to crumble, not with fire, not with noise, but with the quiet certainty of truth finally set free. The groom stared at my sister in horror, stepping away from her like she was poison. The guests sat frozen, caught between pity and disgust. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't in years, power, but not the cruel power they used against me. This was the power of exposing what they had spent a lifetime burying. I had opened the first door, but I wasn't done yet. The guests sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting between me and my parents, searching for truth in every twitch of their faces. My mother clutched her pearls so tightly that I thought they'd snap, while my father's chest rose and fell like he was holding back a scream. I knew words alone wouldn't be enough. They'd spent a lifetime twisting lies into masks, fooling everyone who dared to look too closely. But tonight, I had something stronger than words. I had living proof. I lifted my phone slowly, pressing one button. The doors at the back of the hall swung open and a figure stepped inside. For a moment, no one recognized him. Years of hardship had carved his face into something weathered, something haunted. But then gasps rippled through the hall as whispers began to snake through the crowd. Some people even stood craning their necks to be sure of what they were seeing. It was Daniel Harper, the man my father and mother had destroyed 2 decades ago, the man whose company they stole piece by piece, leaving him ruined, branded a fraud when it was them who had orchestrated the downfall. I remembered the night I heard my father's whispered deal, the laughter in his voice when he said, "Harper will never recover. His pain is our gain." I was 16, but the words had burned into my memory, branded like fire against skin. And now, here Daniel was, alive, standing in front of them, a ghost made flesh, carrying the weight of years that could never be returned. The hall erupted in chaos, my mother's face drained of color, her hand trembling as she clutched my father's arm. My father tried to rise, but his legs betrayed him, shaking too violently to hold his frame. "You," he whispered, his voice breaking in a way I had never heard before. It wasn't anger. It was terror, pure, undeniable terror. Daniel's voice, though raspy from age and hardship, carried across the hall with piercing clarity. "You thought you buried me," he said, his eyes locked on my parents. "You thought you destroyed me, that no one would ever know what you did, but here I stand, and tonight the truth stands with me." His words were a hammer, shattering every remaining illusion they had built. Guests were no longer whispering, they were recording, taking pictures, capturing the fall of the mighty family who had humiliated me just an hour earlier. My sister staggered backward, her hand clapped over her mouth as if she could stop herself from breathing the same air as the man her family had betrayed. Her groom looked at her with wide, horrified eyes, and I knew in that moment their union was finished before it ever began. He saw now that marrying into this family meant inheriting the poison that ran through its veins. I stood tall, my hands steady, my heart beating, not with fear, but with justice long overdue. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the broken one, they were. Their empire was cracking open under the weight of the truth, and yet I knew this was only the beginning. The room buzzed with a storm of whispers and gasps, but my sister stood frozen in the center like a statue about to shatter. Her eyes were locked on her groom, desperate, pleading, searching for even the smallest flicker of support in his face, but there was none. He looked at her as though he'd never seen her before, as though every kiss, every promise, every word of love had been nothing but smoke dissolving before his eyes. He took a long step back, and that simple movement was louder than any outburst could have been. My sister stumbled forward, reaching for his hand. "No, please, listen to me," she cried, her voice cracking with the weight of desperation. "I didn't know. I didn't do any of this." But her words fell flat, hollow, meaningless. The documents had been real. Daniel Harper standing before them had been real. And her silence, her refusal to defend herself earlier, was all the confirmation he needed. His chest rose and fell as though each breath cut him from the inside. Finally, he spoke, his words sharp and deliberate, cutting through the thick air of the hall. "You lied to me. You let me believe I was joining a family built on respect when in truth it's built on theft and blood. You let me bow my future to you without ever once telling me the truth about who you are." My sister shook her head frantically, her tears spilling down her cheeks like rivers breaking free. "I love you. That's the truth. Whatever my parents did, it's not me. It's not us." But he pulled his hand away as if her touch burned him. His voice hardened, his pain transforming into something unyielding. "If you loved me, you would have warned me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have let me find out like this in front of everyone." Gasps rippled again through the crowd. My sister's mascara streaked down her face as she collapsed to her knees, sobbing, begging him not to walk away. "Don't do this, please don't leave me," she cried, her voice echoing through the silent hall. But he didn't move toward her. Instead, he looked at me, his eyes heavy, broken, but filled with a strange kind of gratitude. It wasn't love, not even friendship, but an acknowledgement. I had given him the truth, and in doing so freed him from a lifetime chained to lies. He turned back to her one final time. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall like a sentence being delivered. I can't marry you. Not now, not ever. And with that, he stepped away, walking down the aisle, leaving behind shattered vows and a bride on her knees, surrounded by the ruins of her own silence. My mother's shriek pierced the air, sharp and animalistic, as she rushed to her daughter's side. My father just sat there, slumped in his chair, staring at Daniel Harper like the ghost of his sins had finally dragged him into the light. And I stood still, watching, feeling the first taste of justice sink into my skin, but I also knew deep inside this was not the end. No, this was only the crack before the whole foundation collapsed. The hall no longer felt like a wedding. It felt like a trial, and my parents were standing before the jury of everyone they had ever sought to impress. The guests weren't whispering anymore. They were staring openly, their eyes filled with judgment and disgust. Phones were raised, cameras recording every second. My parents had always thrived in the shadows, manipulating with secrecy and silence. But now, their downfall was unfolding in broad daylight, and there was no undoing it. I looked at my mother crouched on the floor beside my sister, stroking her hair like she was a child. Her face was twisted with rage, but her eyes were glassy, desperate. "Stop this!" she hissed at me, her voice trembling as though she still believed she could command me into silence. "You're destroying your own blood, Marcella. You'll regret this." I let her words hang in the air for a moment, then answered with the calm that had taken me years to find. "You destroyed me long before this night. You destroyed my future when you locked me out of opportunities, when you made sure every step I took was under your shadow. You destroyed me when you slapped me in front of strangers just to remind me I was nothing." My throat tightened, but I held strong, my voice unbreaking. "Now I'm simply giving you back what you gave me." Victor moved closer to the center of the room, laying more papers on a table for the guests to see. Bank transfers, forged contracts, proof of bribes paid under my father's name. Each page was a weapon, each signature a dagger. Guests crowded closer, murmuring in disbelief. Some of them were investors, friends, even distant relatives who had defended my parents for years. Now they stood gaping at the truth, unable to look away. My father finally spoke, his voice hoarse, his mask of power cracking with every word. "Marcella, listen to me," he rasped. "You don't understand what you're doing. These people," he gestured to the guests, "they don't care about you. They'll turn against you the moment they're done feasting on our downfall." His tone shifted, almost pleading. "We're family. You think they won't? But I always have." I stared at him, and for a fleeting moment I saw the man I once begged to love me. But then I remembered the countless nights I cried alone after being told I was unworthy, after being treated like I was a burden. I remembered the sting of my mother's hand at my sister's wedding just hours earlier, a slap meant to strip me of dignity, and my heart hardened again. "No," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the silence like glass breaking. "You never protected me. You protected yourself, and tonight I'm done protecting you." The hall fell into stunned silence, and I felt the shift in the air. It wasn't just exposure anymore. This was the start of dismantling their entire world. The silence was deafening. Every eye in the hall was locked on me, waiting for my next move. I could feel the weight of generations pressing down, the years of humiliation and betrayal that had brought me here. My parents still clung to their pride, even as the evidence burned before them, even as Daniel Harper's presence proved everything they had buried. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small envelope. It was light in my hands, but I knew the power it carried was heavier than stone. I had spent months preparing this moment, unsure if I'd ever have the courage to see it through. But tonight, with their empire crumbling at my feet, I felt no fear, only clarity. I walked to the center of the hall, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step echoing like a drumbeat of judgment. "This," I said, lifting the envelope so all could see, isn't just proof of what they've stolen, this is proof of who they are. I opened it slowly, sliding out copies of legal filings, testimonies, and most damning of all, a signed confession draft my father had once prepared in secret, intending to use against an associate if things went wrong. He had never imagined it would fall into my hands, but it had, and now it was the nail in his coffin. I laid the papers on the table where the guests could see them, their voices rising in shocked murmurs as they read. One man, a longtime investor, shouted in disgust. Another woman, once a close friend of my mother's, turned her face away as if ashamed to have ever stood beside her. Phones were raised higher, flashes flickered, the story already spilling beyond these walls into the world outside. My mother's voice cracked like glass shattering. "Stop it! You'll ruin us all," she screamed, her composure gone, her dignity stripped away. She reached for the papers, but Victor stepped forward, blocking her path with a cold smile. My father, meanwhile, sat slumped, staring at the damning words he himself had once written. He didn't move, didn't protest. For the first time in his life, he looked defeated. I turned to the guests, my voice steady, calm, filled with the kind of power they had tried to deny me all my life. "You wanted to see who my family truly is? You wanted to celebrate them, to raise your glasses in their honor? Now you know the truth. Their wealth is stolen, their power is poisoned, and every smile they've ever shown you was a mask hiding the rot beneath The room erupted in noise, gasps, accusations, the sound of chairs scraping back as people rose in outrage. But through it all, I stood still, my heart pounding with the certainty that my revenge was complete. They hadn't just been exposed, they had been dismantled, their legacy ripped apart in the very place they had sought to humiliate me. And as my sister sobbed at my mother's side, as my father sat hollow and broken, I knew they were finally tasting the bitter fruit of everything they had sown. But deep inside, I also knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The chaos from the hall spilled far beyond its walls. By the time I left that night, the scandal had already started spreading like wildfire. Guests who had once praised my parents were now on their phones, whispering to reporters, sending evidence, forwarding videos of my mother's breakdown and my father's silence. By morning, their faces were plastered across every news site, headlines screaming words like fraud, scandal, betrayal. The empire they had guarded for decades was crumbling in real time, and I didn't even need to lift another finger. But inside the house, the wreckage was quieter, colder. My sister had locked herself in her room, refusing to face the world, her sobs echoing through the hallways. My mother wandered like a ghost, muttering excuses to no one, trying to convince herself it was all just a mistake, that she could still fix it. And my father, he sat in his study, staring at a glass of whiskey that never seemed to empty, his once commanding presence reduced to a hollow shell. I stood in the doorway that night, watching him, waiting for him to speak. Finally, he lifted his eyes to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw something almost human in them. Not power, not pride, not rage, just regret. His voice was rough when he said, "You've destroyed us, Marcella, but you've destroyed yourself too." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to believe his words had weight, that they still carried the sting they once did, but they didn't. I realized in that moment that the fear he used to control me with was gone. It died the second he lost the ability to command the room. "No," I whispered finally, my voice steady. "I didn't destroy myself. I freed myself." He flinched like my words had cut him, and for once I didn't look away. I let him see the strength he tried to erase from me all my life. Then I turned and walked out, leaving him in the ruins he had built with his own hands. The city outside hummed with life, but for me, the night felt strangely still. I had gotten my revenge. I had ripped away their masks, torn down the lies, and shown the world the monsters they really were. And yet, standing there beneath the stars, I felt something deeper than victory. I felt peace. For the first time, I could breathe without the weight of their judgment crushing my chest. But I also knew this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about rebuilding myself, about writing a new story that was finally mine. And though they were broken, humiliated, and disgraced, my story was only just beginning. The morning after the wedding, I stood by my window and watched the city wake. For years, I had looked out at those same streets from the shadows of my parents' wealth, always feeling small, always feeling like my life belonged to them. But that morning felt different. The air was cleaner, sharper, as though the storm had finally passed. My phone buzzed with messages, some from guests, some from strangers who had seen the videos that went viral overnight. They weren't messages of pity, they were messages of awe. People telling me I was brave, that I had done what so many were too afraid to do, stand against the people who should have loved me most but instead built their empire by breaking others. My sister didn't come out of her room. My mother didn't leave the house. My father didn't speak another word to me. And I realized something in their silence. They weren't just humiliated, they were finished. The very thing they worshipped most, their power, had been ripped from their hands. And I had done it in one night. For the first time, they tasted what it felt like to be powerless. For the first time, they lived the life they tried to force on me. I thought revenge would feel like fire, loud, disruptive, impossible to contain, but it didn't. It felt like release, like chains falling to the ground. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their acceptance. I didn't even need their love. I had given myself what they never gave me, freedom. As I stood there breathing in the crisp air of a new beginning, I knew this chapter of my life was closed. But I also knew there were people out there listening to my story who needed to hear this. Sometimes the ones who hurt you most are the ones who should have protected you. And sometimes the only way to reclaim yourself is to walk through the fire of truth and never look back. So to everyone who's been with me through this journey, thank you. My story isn't just mine, it belongs to every person who has been betrayed, broken, or silenced. And if my voice gave you even a flicker of courage to stand up for yourself, then every wound I've carried was worth it. This isn't the end, it's only the beginning. And if you want to walk with me into the next story, into the next battle, then stay with me. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs it, and let's make sure no voice is ever silenced again. Because revenge may end a chapter, but healing, strength, and truth, they write the book.